Hello everybody, I'm not sure if this is actually working, but my name's Tom from uDrew, and today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the uDrew journey so far, and basically all the things that I've screwed up and everything I've learned as a result from that. So to start with, we're just going to set the scene. So context is really important. A lot of this is anecdotal and may not be from the same experience from your point of view. Next part, we're going to talk about concepts, so where to start, minimum viable products, prototyping, testing, and beautiful metrics. We're going to touch base on the company, so what to look for and things like that, and getting yourself out there. And then finally, the F word, which is all things funding and all the fun stuff around that. So start with just a bit of a heads up. I do have a strange sense of humor, and I'm clearly not a graphic designer. So this might not be to everyone's taste. And as I mentioned earlier, this is all just purely from my perspective. A lot of it isn't research. It's not officially advice that's out there, but it's purely what I've picked up on the way through my own screw-ups and things like that. So a bit of context on myself to help you make that decision about what to believe and what not to believe. Here's a little timeline about my career. So started off pretty normal stuff, as teenagers do, stacking auto parts and sharpening ice skates. I started getting trained up as a structural draftsman when I was in my teens, still at high school, just in the summer and things, and that was my introduction to the building industry. Kept doing that for a while, became professional, and when I graduated from school, went to study geology, which is my true passion. Did a few engineering certifications, so that's just TAFE stuff, so I can understand what I was drawing. Became a geotechnician. It was a great little industry niche, combining my geology and my background with the building industry, setting up labs around the place. And I like to include this photo because it's when I was actually fit. And yeah, there you go. I then co-founded Prompt Engineering with my old man, who's a structural engineer, and ran all the geo stuff from there. Gave myself a strange made-up title called Geoanalyst, which is basically I was in charge of drill teams. They'd send me in core samples, and I'd have to do a bunch of lab tests and manage a few laboratories and recommend concrete and footings to use for buildings. Probably as interesting as it sounds, but I really liked it. I then discovered the beauty of software development in 2015. That was largely because the uDrew idea had been in my head since 2008, and I was building up data, and I needed a way to kind of see if it would work or not, and I couldn't afford a developer, so I taught myself. I then went to get an ignition. I was very fortunate to get a scholarship with that to sort of test out the uDrew concept and learn a little bit about the business side of things, which I was a total greenhorn about. I'd spent most of my career either out in the middle of nowhere drilling and getting core samples, or stuck in dark laboratories, sciencing the shit out of everything. So it was really good exposure for me to learn about, marketing, finances, businessy stuff. So uDrew was officially founded in 2017 after that validation, and we're currently still going strong today. I was very fortunate to get in the +8 program in 2018, which really complemented what I've learned at Ignition. They flew us to the US, and we got to talk to some really experienced people, as well as getting the guidance from all the SpaceCube community, which has just opened my eyes up and been amazing, and still ongoing support today. Very fortunate to get the Innovator of the Year award in 2018. Still kick myself that we actually got that, but that really opened up a lot of doors, and it's just amazing validation again. As well, got nominated for a 40 under 40 award for our work with startup communities and kids trying to get into the entrepreneurial space, which is really nice. And today I'm just a bit of an absolute zombie with all this COVID stuff going on, trying to run a company and talking to myself in an empty room about a presentation. So to sum this up, down the bottom you've got some arrows. So my whole life I've always been interested in building and inventing stupid things, and I'll talk about a couple of those today. uDrew, originally the idea came in 2008 when I was having difficulties with my local government and trying to get a front fence approved. And I started collecting and doing research all the way back then until that 2016 mark. I officially joined the tech world in 2017, where uDrew was officially founded. So that's a bit of my background. So a little bit about uDrew. We're an online platform that allows anyone to create their own fully certified and engineered building plans. So basically a user jumps on their sketches, whatever they want to build. It automatically checks against every local and national building requirement, as well as autonomously creates all the structural engineering for every project and spits out your fully certified and approved building plans in a couple of minutes, and you can start building. Here's a little video. Just to give you some visual context. So basically we're drawing a fence in this one, so the user's drawing a line, and it's like a traffic light system. So green means you're good, red means you're bad. We're just adding in a little gate now. It's a sliding driveway gate, and if something doesn't comply, it just goes red and gets angry with you and tells you what's wrong. And you can double click and change all its preferences and play around and move it around until everything's happy green colors. So right now we're just adding in another driveway gate, and I'm going to show you a bit of an example of how it adapts to council regulation. So we're going to make a rule called the vehicle truncation law kick in now. There we go. And so what that's done is just calculated that yeah, you need a certain line of sight for when you're reversing your car. So the clever stuff that's happening in the background there is it's checking all the geomechanical properties, doing wind tunneling calculations and a bunch of other things. There's about 70 data sets happening in the background with info from NASA and CSIRO. It's really complex. So this is the part now, it's generated a preview. It's gone through every millimeter, calculated all the materials that you need for your project and letting people play around with how it looks. So these things we need to know for council approval sake, and also some engineering factors. So it allows the user to, you know, get a cartoon-like version at least of what it is they're drawing in real time, change all the preferences, and it automatically fixes itself and re-engineers itself every change. So basically you're always going to have fully compliant and extremely efficient designs that no human engineer can actually ever beat. At best they can match, because we're following very mathematical sort of base rule engines and calculations where it actually learns. I won't get into much more of this. We'll get on to the talk, but this is basically finished project. So it took about 2 minutes to design our fence there, and we're all approved. Send all the documents through and we can start building straight away. So I'll go to the next slide now. The point is, I just wanted to get that context out there. So you can see a little bit about where a lot of this stuff I'm talking about is coming from. And it's purely from my point of view. So I just really want to stress that. You don't get many people doing talks saying, you know, probably don't listen to me, but hey, I like to admit that every talk, and it's a kind of get out of jail free card in case I say something screwed up too. So where to start with a new concept? So the important thing is you need to find the market metrics. But that's just a matter of perspective. Some people really love it, but the market, so you've got to figure out people actually want what you're doing. So there's some crappy pictures I've put on the side here, and a great example of that is portable bath capsule, which I just thought was hilarious and wanted an excuse to put that in there. So do surveys, ask around your mum and dad and your best friends. Talk to strangers, talk to experts, talk to fellow startups. They're always going to give you great, honest opinions in a non-nasty way, and use what they say to improve. Metrics, so it's really good to define what it is you're trying to actually achieve from doing this. Are you doing prototype testing? What are the results you want? Is there a specific area you want to learn from? Where do you see the concept in 5 or 10 years? You know, you don't need exact numbers or, you know, a proper business plan for a 10-year plan, but have an idea in your head. Start thinking about possible exit strategies or who you're wanting to partner with at this early stage, and just have it there. Now, using the above, it's good to put together at least a design for your minimum product. I'll talk about. So it is very suitable for a lot of startups and things, but it really depends on the context. So with what we're doing, for example, the building industry is really brutal. So if we're to release a sort of half-assed product, people could actually die as well. And if we're screwing it up, they're not going to forgive us, and they'll never use our product again. So we have to be very careful at uDrew with our minimum products and how we do them. Other areas, you know, you can be a bit more half-assed and get something out there to test things, and it's a really great way to get really quick feedback. And you might get a bit of love, but often you'll get a bit of hate, but it'll identify which areas you can really improve on. So the reason I love the MLP thing is, you know, I'm in love with what we do at uDrew. I'm super passionate about it, and I want people to be as passionate as I am. And I don't want to release something that's going to bite me in the eye. But, you know, you've got to remember, there's no right answer to that, and it does depend on what you're doing. So if you're in medtech, you know, obviously people could die as well if you release something that's not going to help people or whatever. But if you're building a little app or a fun little game, you know, it doesn't matter if it has a few bugs in it, and it's a great way to highlight which areas need fixing without having to do extensive user testing. So take it with a pinch of salt, and it's great to make your own mind up on how you see that. personally, I'm an MLP fan, of course. Now, let's start. It's often prototyping after you kind of come up with a design is really powerful. And there's a number of things you should take into account, like the general pain in the ass factors, the value that you're going to get out of it, and as well what it's going to cost you. So have a think about it before you do it. Is there a cheap, effective, quick way that you can get the answers you're looking for? A prototype could be, a crappy cardboard thing that you sit out the front of Coles and get people to pretend to press buttons or whatever and test the user experience. Excel I found is fantastic, but I'm a total Excel nerd, and I'll show you a couple of examples of what I did for my early prototypes. But the good thing is, what you need to take into account is, what's going to suit your concept, your business, your product the best, and have a think. So some examples here. Put down, so we've got something physical like a shoe, something universal that's sort of in between, and tech heavy stuff. There's different approaches that suit each. The green ones that you can see here, these are ones that I've always loved and generally am very biased towards using. And stuff that anyone can do. So if you're building something physical, just go to Bunnings, get some glue and some foam on cardboard and you can mock something up pretty quick. You can buy existing products. So in my old lab, I bought 10 dough mixers once. They were only like $9 each. And I modified them slightly and to do separation of certain mineral grains. Anyway, it's a long story. But basically, it cost me $100 and it saved me about 4 hours of work a day with these things that I've put together, and they worked fantastic. They gave me the basis to then build a further model that was much more efficient, blah, blah, blah. Mock-ups and flowcharts are really cool. It's a great way to map processes and it gets you thinking about every step. I'll show you a few examples of my ones. The tech-heavy stuff, unless you're a software engineer, Excel is probably the best way to test these. And once again, you've got conditional rules. You can do ifs and things like that, little formulas in Excel to really test out the flow of a process or calculation of results if it's quite scientific. But I just love Excel, and I'm totally biased, and I could do a whole talk just on Excel. Just remember, the prototype, it's not a work of art. It should be a tool that you make to get really quick answers in an effective manner. And so think of it as a learning step, not a final product. Here's an example of the first ever blueprints that I drew up for just something stupid I was working on. It was actually really cool, and I will build this one day. Basically, this is, I think, 4 A3 pages long blueprints of a dog door that I designed that used static electricity and magnets to groom my big hairy dog every time she'd walk in the house. It was really cool, and I loved it, and I was a former drafty, so I and it turned out really cool. I just never built it because it's a bit silly. I think I was like 19 when I drew this. I've still got the plans and I still intend to go through with it. So if anyone wants to invest in a grooming dog door, hit me up. That'd be cool. Here's our first functioning uDrew prototype. You'll probably recognize that as Excel. So I taught myself Visual Basic to build this one. And the fence down the bottom, everything there is actually fully dynamic. The user types in how they want their fence and the user's Visual Basic, and it redraws every time. So effectively, I built a tool in Visual Basic that did fence plans, and we based our first prototype, our first fully functioning online prototype and testing on the exact equations I used in this. So it was really powerful, and it was something that I could do myself without spending thousands and thousands of dollars of software engineers doing the proper version. So it was really good and a great way to learn. The next step from that is I wanted to then mock out the full process of uDrew. So after I did Ignition in 2016, that was my first exposure to business stuff. I wanted to kind of, I guess, shit everything out of my brain into one document. So it was about 120 pages long. I listed out the entire process of uDrew from start to finish, thinking 5 to 10 years ahead. Eventually became the basis of all my patents, which we did, which is another story I'll touch on later. But it's just a great way to get it out of your head, and you can just pass this document on to experts who can then focus on building certain aspects if you don't have the ability to do it yourself. Now, on patents, when I first started, I was really nervous about people ripping the idea off and a bit distrusting. I think this stems from the fact I was raised in the building industry. And it's not a very friendly or collaborative industry a lot of the time. And so I was quite protective. and I ended up doing the patents because I was too paranoid about it, which in hindsight was the wrong approach. Since I've joined the startup community and Space Cubed and the tech sort of world, I've realized that everyone just wants help and everyone's genuinely passionate, and you might not necessarily need the patents. Now there's pros and cons to them. So the pros are sort of on the green text on the left or whatever. So patents are great to have because they do increase your valuation. Investors do like to see patents. It adds a bit of security to them and whatnot. It does add a bit of prestige too. It's always cool to say patent pending, or, you know, I've written some patents and blah, blah, blah. So maybe that's an ego thing for me, but now it's got discourages competition here. I put an asterisk next to that and I'll explain that in a minute. So in theory, it does discourage competition. I'll leave it at that for now. And it really does help your validation of your product, that you have got something cool and new that no one's done before. So it's pretty good in that sense. Now, on the downside, these are bloody expensive. So I probably spent, you know, 40 to 50 grand on patents all up. And as a startup, that money could have been better utilized in a million different areas in hindsight. It's been great to get the protection, and, you know, I've managed to raise, so it could have been very helpful for that as well. It took a lot of time, and it did probably slow me down 8 months, I'd say, writing these things. Now they're expensive and they're really difficult to enforce once you do get them. So you're going to need money to back it up to actually protect them if someone breaches your patents. Now the asterisks again, so it does discourage competition, but it's very easy to counterfeit because all your information in your patents goes public. And so if there's a region where you don't have your patent active, what's to stop them Googling your patent and just replicating it in whatever country? And that might be from a company that had billions of dollars, and they could just shotgun it around the world, and, you know, it kind of leaves you in a pretty shitty position on that as well. So in multi-regional, it's about 10 grand per region, I think, roughly. I might get abused for that, but something like that. It varies from concept to concept. You'd probably expect 5 to 10 grand on normal. Others are a bit more expensive because they're pretty full on. And so every region you have to pay that. So there's not just one patent that covers the world. There's the PCT agreement, which is a bunch of countries, so like US, Brazil, and UK, I think, like that, in Australia, New Zealand, and a few other ones. But you still have to pay every country, and you're paying that 5 to 10 grand per country to enforce it. And then it takes a couple of years to be approved, and you're in limbo. But there's a lot of other ways you can secure your IP without needing patents. So have a good look into them and see if anything applies to what you're doing. I found copyright and design registrations are really good. The design registration is like you can shotgun sort of the layout of your concept, and you can do multiple different designs. And so, like, if the button to proceed is on the left, and then you've got all this other shit on the page, shotgun that, and then put the button on the right, and blah, 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 blah. And just kind of, you're bagsing every logical progression of the flowchart or the process that you've made. And that's a good way to protect it. Very cheap too, compared to patents. The other one I always love is secret sauce, and it's probably because, you know, I eat too much McDonald's, but I just love that saying. But you've got to make sure it's kept somewhere secret and safe and not leaked. So secret sauce can be things like data that you've collected, findings, your list of potential clients, your list of investors. Some example of stuff that we've got about that is I spent 8 years collating core sample data from around Western Australia for drilling of geo stuff. And so I made a database of 4,000 core samples from around WA with lab results, descriptions, and everything. And that's a unique thing that doesn't exist in the world. I'm the only person with that. We use that to build the machine learning sort of stuff that we use to predict the geomechanical movement at building sites remotely. And no one's done that in the world. And so we've got this under lock and key, obviously. And yeah, it's a really cool thing to have. But you've got to be a bit careful as well on who you're leaking your stuff to. So we get into sort of cybersecurity things and NDAs at this point, but I'm not a fan of NDAs personally, but I won't get too much into that. Okay. So once you've done all that, you've got to start testing. So you need to justify it and put your own biases aside. So don't ask your mum, your mate, or whatever. You need to get real users who have no agenda or no hidden agenda and just will give you honest feedback. Now, the reason I love this is because once you get bogged down, you need those fresh eyes because it's so easy to miss something blatantly obvious if you've been working on something for years or months. And often people will just pick things up straight away and you kick yourself, you go, fuck, why didn't I think of that? But it's just a really good way to expose those things. It gives you great validation of what you have built and what works and what doesn't work. And it gives you awesome ammunition for pitching, for trying to raise funds. You can get real numbers like, 84% of people gave us the thumbs up and said they would pay this for whatever. And, you can use these in your pitching and they're really, really effective. As long as you keep a sort of, agile and pivotable mindset while you do these, they're really, really important. So you've got to keep your mind open. All feedback is good feedback. No matter how stupid it sounds, it's worth noting and collating it and being honest with yourself and your product about. So you've got to listen to your market, take in their advice and try and put aside your personal biases wherever you can. So this is where we get to the gloating part. So here's just a few examples of some of the stuff that I've recorded. I'm totally anal with recording metrics. Very OCD actually, but this is actually comes from an old pitch deck of mine. So basically this is the part where we're saying, we're validating ourselves. So we've done over 700 tests and we had 100% engineering pass rate. So that's a great thing to be able to gloat about. Here's some stats from our first 3 pilots we did with the city of Wanneroo. And so we've got awesome metrics. And we wouldn't have got these without user testing and piloting. And so record everything you're doing and have a sort of plan before you start about what you're trying to learn from this and record it. Here's our first proper user testing group that was done in January 2019. As I said, I'm not a graphic designer, so excuse my graphic, but cool numbers. I won't get too much into them at the moment, but 2 to point out right now are the 80% of the respondents would recommend uDrew to a friend, which is really cool, considering it was our first sort of public testing. And we only got 63% of overall satisfaction, which is weird. Like, why would you recommend it to your friend if you're not really that satisfied? But anyway, it was a really good result for our first set of tests. And we learned a lot from this, and we've subsequently re-engineered a lot of the stuff that's happening in the back, and we've improved on the system 100-fold in functionality and technology and user experience. It's just looking awesome. So we had really good results, but there was one little point that really stuck. So it's circled here. There was one step throughout the whole process that users couldn't get past without having to talk to us. That was really annoying. So we'd spent a decade by this point researching, developing, sciencing the shit out of everything, creating, I think, about 7 to 10 world first things that we have in this system that was tested here. But there was one little user experience step that people just couldn't get past. And if you remember that video before, it was just double clicking to end drawing your fence line. People just didn't think to do that. And myself, being a former drafty, that's what you do on all drafting software, right? So it was a little oversight from me. Call that assumption bias, or I don't know, something like that. But anyway, point is, none of us had thought of that. Out of these 12 people, not one person was able to get past that part and needed our help to get past. So it was blatantly obvious in hindsight, but it's something that we just hadn't considered. So without that user testing, we would have released it publicly and we would have been screwed. So that sort of reminds me of a... Sorry, I didn't have the time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. So it's similar to this, like complex things, automated engineering and complex algorithms and whatnot, but making them easy enough for anybody to understand without the background, that's where the artwork comes in. And yeah, we learnt a lot from our... But we used all this, and we've got even better now. And maybe that's a big... So we were able to recycle a bunch of really cool technologies out of this first system and make them into standalone little functional niche areas. And you can see here some brands that we're talking to and in partnership for these individual parts, and it's turning out to be really lucrative. And we've been able to recycle, you know, sort of 80% of the first version, which is really great. Here's a bit of a sneak peek of our new version that, that was a we really simplified the hell out of it and made it much more user-friendly. So this one's actually for Auckland, so it's probably, no, there's a bit of context, I guess, coming in here. So we're building a deck today, and the user, instead of having to sketch and interact as much, we've changed it into a few more questions with information tabs, which I don't think is shown on this video, but anyway. And the user basically gets to pretty much traffic light system again. But there's a lot more sophisticated stuff happening in the background now, and it's a lot simpler for the user to actually use. So we'll get through. Oh, there's only a couple of seconds left, so may as well play it. But yeah, it's as simple as that now, and the user can now finish their project. There's all the generated drawings and all the council details, and you can actually go straight away. So that took about a minute, I think, and this person can now legally build their deck, and it's all engineering approved, it's been council checked. So you can see the process is much quicker and a lot less fiddly, and that was because of that user testing that we did. So here's the latest batch of user testing, which actually just came through. I won't go through all these metrics, but what we learned from the first round, we implemented into that new system. And I've got highlighted just in the conclusion here, the overall satisfaction rate. So they've shot up 12% on average. So we actually had 100% of the building industry people would recommend us to a friend, and so that number doesn't look right. Anyway, and yeah, so it's all gone up, and it's because we listened and we implemented those that feedback from the first round, and now we're ready to roll. So we get to the team. But he's a character. So putting together the team was quite difficult for me on a personal level. So I've been working on this by myself as a hermit for like 10 years before I got on the first team member. But I was really, really lucky that I did get the ones on board. Actually, about a third of them sold their houses in Queensland and moved over just to join uDrew. So that was James, Kate, and James's wife as well, Jun. They moved over and sold everything just to join uDrew, and I would have been lost without them. So we now do all our software internally without contracts and things. They're just fantastic. We've got my awesome wife in the middle there, Danny. She's a former accountant and doing all that stuff. And basically everyone is just niche expert at their field and really, really cool people too. And we're very fortunate to have every one of these staff on board now, and they all bring their own little perspective, and no, it's fantastic. So you want to incentivize your staff. So some of our staff, we've got vesting equity options, but it's not my place to tell you what that should be. And it comes down to individual companies. You want to incentivize staff to be as passionate as you are, but you've also got to take into account your other shareholders, and there's a lot of moving parts to that, and probably recommend talking to an expert about that. If I had it my way, I'd be giving everyone a lot more equity they're on now, but and I'm working on that. So anyway, I won't get into that too much, but yeah, look into it. Once all that stuff's done, you've got to remember, you've got to get yourself out there. So after every networking event or whatever I go to, I generally try a lanyard thing. It's probably a bit naughty, but I've got a wall at my house. I stick them on. So since 2016, when I started doing that, the first exposure at Ignition, I've now got about probably 600 of these things, and it just reminds me how important networking is. So every brand you see here, and there's a lot more that I haven't included, we're either in talks with, we've partnered up with, and we're just learning a lot from them. So this comes from networking events, it comes from stalking people on LinkedIn within reason, and getting out there and asking for feedback, guidance, help, and assistance. A lot of these people will catch up with you for a cup of coffee, give you their feedback, and introduce you possibly, and it kind of just keeps going. So unfortunately, being an introvert, believe it or not, I find this really difficult. That's why I remind myself how important it is often, and you should be trying to get yourself out there as much as possible to learn. Not necessarily, you know, make $1 billion, but learn and get feedback. That's where I see a lot of the value in this coming from. So if we finally get to funding, a lot of startups have the misconception that this is sort of the end goal. And once you get funding, you've made it. And, you know, I can see where that comes from because, you know, we're all starting off poor as hell. Like my wife and I went to remortgage our house to do this and still haven't paid it back. Still could lose our house if uDrew goes under. So NAB, if you're listening, we're going great and give me an extension. But yeah, it's very stressful. So just remember, it's not the end goal. There's a whole lot of other problems that do come up when you do a raise. And the things you need to consider as well, especially if you're doing something that hasn't been done before, you know, how the hell do you value your project? You know, have you got customers yet? Have you got IP? You know, how do you value it? Now, in Perth, there's a bit of an unspoken rule. If you're pre-market, you cannot ever be over $2 million valuation, which is sort of fair enough. But yeah, I think the best way to value is with actual customers, actual income. With tech companies, it's relatively easy and lazy. They generally say, well, it's somewhere between 10 times whatever your revenue is to 20 times on an extreme level. I'd say at uDrew, we're not at that stage yet to do that, but that's a simple way to do it if you're fortunate enough to have paying customers and revenue. And you've got to think of what type of investor is suited to your concept and personality as well. Like you're going to get in bed with these people and, you know, you're effectively married to them for a long time, and you want the right personality who brings the right skill set and networks and is able to guide you where you need it. So it's not just about the money, it's about looking at it strategically. How can they help you grow and guide you on your journey? So it can be hard to find, and, you know, I'd recommend being patient, doing your research, and also doing a bit of due diligence on who your ideal investor looks like. Be upfront with them, be always honest and truthful, and get to know them, and take it from there. And there are really cool investors around in Perth. We don't have the market size of Sydney, for example, or, you know, Silicon Valley. In fact, they say every dollar you raise in Perth, you can raise 10 in Sydney, and every dollar in Sydney, you can raise another 10 to 100 in California. But there's still some great people here, and there's some really good early seed raises. So get yourself out there. SpaceCube community is a great way to meet them and get to know them. But importantly, you know, get organized. All the stuff we've talked about previously here. Once you've got most of that in place, then you're ready to start having the conversations, and you can talk to investors, ask their feedback. What else do we need? And a lot of them will happily give it to you. A lot of them are really good. There's a couple dodgy ones, but as a whole, they're pretty good in Perth. So take into account that it's not the end game to raise, it's just a start. So always take that into account. But in a nutshell, a bit of a simplified. The earlier your stage, the higher the risk for the investor to come on board. So they're going to want a better bang for their buck. So you can see on this chart here, you've got the seed stage. You're not going to be able to raise as much, but hopefully that'll build you up. And there are quite a lot of good investors in Perth at that stage, and it keeps going up and up and up. Now, admittedly, when it gets to the Series B phase, I've sort of just totally guessed those numbers. You can see there's a gazillion dollars up there. I was thinking with that, but it's basically saying, yeah, the lower the risk, the more you can raise, but also the more company you're going to have to dilute. Now, there's a note down the bottom right of this. So have a look at this website. If you want to press pause and write that down somewhere. That's got a great little visual way of showing, you know, when you're going to be raising and what you should have in place and what it means for dilution. And yeah, it's a lot of really good information about that. So I'd really recommend having a look at that. But in a nutshell, that's sort of roughly what it looks like, but don't take my word on it. So I guess to sum it up, you got to fail quick and fail hard, but it's all about learning. So every time we screw something up, as long as you learn something from it, it's actually an investment in your education. So it sounds cheesy as hell, but I'm really for that. And, you know, if you fuck something up majorly, you're always going to remember it. You're not going to do it again. By learning and doing the best you can and talking to people, communicate, get it out there, get feedback, and try and put your biases aside, and you're going to go great. I've failed a lot, and there's a lot that I haven't mentioned because unfortunately, there's a time frame on this, but don't be afraid to get out there and give it a go. So thank you all so much for your time, if anyone's actually watched this. And I hope you're all going safe and doing well in this strange, crazy COVID time. But feel free to reach out if you ever want to talk about anything, or if you need my 2 cents, I'm more than happy to help. Thanks very much, everyone, and all the best. See ya.